But now, you thought that all you'd have to do was pay the $100 fine, but then what happened?
Well, I did just pay the fine, you know, and that was the end of it. And it went in the papers, Whoopi and another pop star bites the dust, you know. And then I came over to America and just, with no particular decision, decided that I'd like to live here, you know. I came over for a visit or something, and I was always coming and going and coming and going. And Yoko had been educated here, and she was always going on at me about New York, you know, and she finally showed it me and walked me around. And I fell in love with it. And we thought, get an apartment instead of staying in a hotel all the time.
Surely.
So the next minute we thought, hey, well, let's stay, you know, isn't it great? So we also had other complications going on. The show isn't long enough for it, about her ex-husband running away with her daughter, and there was court cases in Houston, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and we had to keep applying for these visas, and after you bust, it's suggested that you don't apply for 9 months, you know, and people now have problems getting in. Mick Jagger, Stones, lots of musicians, Paul, lots of people they have to sort of do a lot of ritual to get in before they can come and go. So we tried to say, look, we have this big case, we need to come in. And there was always a hassle and a hassle and a hassle. And then they started trying to throw me out.
All right, so we're at the point now where it might be helpful to have Mr. Wilds, your attorney, present, just so that nothing is said that might prejudice.
Well, it's really in case you have a question that I can't answer. You know, they ask me what's happening with you, and I say, well, there's some paper went to some senator that called, and I don't know who
All right, fine. You were told it might be a good idea to wait for 9 months before applying for citizenship?
No, this was after the bust in England, before applying to visit the United States, that it would be a cool idea. That's sort of, you know, it would be a cool idea.
What is your status in the country right now?
That's why Leon's here. What am I, Leon?
Well, John was charged with being deportable in the United States for being an overstay by a very interesting turn of events. The district director of the New York Immigration Service charged him with being an overstay after he gave him a 2-week extension of his time. And in the middle of that 2-week period,
he was here on visa, right? And he overstayed? Is that the position?
He had originally come in as a visitor, and he had had a number of extensions. And then finally, the Immigration Service gave him a 2-week extension. And right in the midst of that 2-week final extension, they revoked the period that they had given him, and they declared that he had been here as an overstay for the week that he had been here with their authorization. And thus the Immigration Service created the very status that they charged him with being deportable for. We fought that deportation case, and a decision was finally rendered after about a year that he was, in fact, an overstay. Now, the essential problem in the deportation case and what lies beneath the surface is that the only way one can get out of it is either to ask permission to leave this country voluntarily and get out, which John was not prepared to do, or to apply for permanent resident status. And the law prescribes that any person who had ever been convicted of any offense, no matter how small, relating to the possession of marijuana, at any time in his lifetime and under any circumstances, cannot obtain residence. And so that what was happening when the government did this little routine of revoking his stay and charging him with being an overstay, they were locking him actually into a position where the only application he could make was one which they were pretty sure he could never succeed in.
Which was?
Pardon?
The application that he would make would be one that he would never succeed in. Permanent residence.
Yes.
All right.
Now, we applied for permanent residence for John and for Yoko. We won Yoko's case, and she was granted residence, but John's case was denied. We went up on appeal before the Board of Immigration Appeals, and we lost there as well. And we are now before the United States Circuit Court of Appeals on the same issue. And basically, on that case, the issue resolves itself into whether or not what happened in England amounts to possession under our law, and whether what he possessed in England was actually marijuana under our law. You see, the substance which John was convicted of possessing, he pleaded guilty, was called cannabis resin. That's a generic term, and it includes a number of substances. we had one of the top experts in the United States, a psychiatrist at Harvard Medical School, testify, and he gave the only expert testimony. And his testimony was that cannabis resin is not marijuana, and marijuana is not cannabis resin. Yet the Immigration Service came to the conclusion that it was marijuana. And finally, with respect to the possession aspect, our law in the United States is very clear with respect to possession. You cannot be convicted in this country for possessing an illicit substance unless it is clear that you had a knowledge as to the illicit nature of the substance that you had.
Mm-hmm.